On the day of the meeting to divide my deceased son's inheritance, a homeless man approached my car and blocked my entrance. "Ma'am, don't get in that car. Your daughter-in-law just left here and said I felt my blood run cold. When I arrived at the meeting, the witch fainted. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you're watching. That way I can see how far my story has come. I never thought the most important day of my life, after my son's funeral, would begin with the words of a stranger on the street. My name is Rosa Maria. I am 62 years old, and that Tuesday morning I was heading to the lawyer's office for the reading of my beloved Eduardo's will. He had died just a month before, and the pain was still so fresh that every breath hurt. I parked my blue Civic Wave in front of the office building downtown. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always do. I needed those moments to calm down, to mentally prepare myself to see Leah, my daughter-in-law, who since the funeral had displayed a coldness that deeply disturbed me. As I took the keys out of the ignition, a man approached my window. He was thin, about 50 years old, wearing worn but clean clothes. His face had the serious expression of someone who has seen too much in life. At first, I felt afraid. We live in a city where it's not unusual to be mugged in broad daylight. "Ma'am, excuse me for bothering you," he said in a husky but respectful voice. "You are Eduardo Martinez's mother." My heart raced. How did he know my son's name? I nodded slowly, without fully lowering the window. "Ma'am, don't get in that car when you get out of there," he said, pointing toward my Wave. His eyes held an urgency that chilled my blood. "Your daughter-in-law just left here a few minutes ago. I saw her rummaging through something under your car." "What are you saying?" I managed to whisper. My voice sounded strange, as if it was coming from very far away. "That woman, your son's wife, was crouching next to the front of your car. She had something in her hands, it looked like pliers or something. When she saw me looking, she got very nervous and ran off." The world started to spin around me. Leah had arrived before me. But why would she be touching my car? And who was this man who seemed to know so much about my family? "Who are you?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "My name is Carlos. I worked on the construction of this building years ago. I know all the people who come by here regularly." He moved a little closer and lowered his voice. "Ma'am, your son was a good person. He always greeted me when he came to these offices. That's why I was worried when I saw that woman doing it." A strange mix of gratitude and terror washed over me. Eduardo had always been like that, kind to everyone, regardless of their social status. He was the kind of person who remembered the janitor's name and asked about the doorman's family. "What exactly did you see her doing?" I asked him, although part of me didn't want to know the answer. Carlos looked both ways down the street before answering. "She was under the front, near where the wheels are. She was moving something with those tools. When she finished, she wiped her hands on a towel she had brought and threw it in that trash can over there." He pointed toward a container near the building's entrance. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. Leah, the woman who had cried at the funeral, who had received condolences from everyone we knew, had been sabotaging my car. "Ma'am, I don't know what problem you have with that lady, but something isn't right. My instinct tells me it's not safe for you to drive that car today." I looked at my watch. 9:55, the meeting would start in 5 minutes. I had to decide quickly, trust the words of a stranger or assume it was a strange coincidence. "Thank you for telling me," I finally told him. "Could you wait for me here? I need to go to that meeting, but when I get out, I'd like to talk to you more." Carlos nodded. I'll be around, ma'am. Just be careful with that woman. Something about her eyes didn't please me at all. I got out of the car on shaky legs. Every step toward the building felt like walking on quicksand. It was possible Liao wanted to hurt me. Why? During the 3 years she had been married to Eduardo, we had always had a cordial relationship, although we were never truly close. The elevator seemed to rise in slow motion toward the 7th floor. When the doors opened, I could see the conference room at the end of the hall. Through the glass walls, I made out the silhouette of Liao, sitting in one of the chairs talking with the lawyer. As I opened the door to the room, Liao looked up at me. The change in her expression was immediate and frightening. Her face went completely pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. Her eyes opened wide and she began to breathe heavily. "Rosa Maria," said Mr. Herrera, standing up to greet me. "Just in time. We can now begin." He couldn't finish his sentence. Liao had abruptly stood up, staggering. Her right hand went to her chest and she began to make a strange sound, as if she couldn't breathe. "Liao, are you okay?" I asked instinctively, despite the fear her reaction to seeing me had caused. You should be," she murmured in a broken voice. And before she could finish her sentence, her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed onto the conference table. The lawyer ran toward her while I froze by the door. What had she meant by, "you should be"? Should I be where? Dead. Carlos's words echoed in my mind like alarm bells. Liao had hoped I wouldn't make it to that meeting. The ambulance took 12 minutes to arrive, 12 minutes that felt like hours as I watched Liao slowly regain consciousness in the conference room. Mr. Herrera had loosened the collar of her blouse and placed a glass of cold water on her wrists, but I couldn't get her truncated words out of my mind. "You should be." When she finally opened her eyes, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It was a mix of fear, confusion, and something deeper that unnerved me. It was guilt I saw in her eyes. "I don't need to go to the hospital," she mumbled when the paramedics arrived. "It was just stress." It had been a very difficult few days since Eduardo. She broke down mentioning my son's name, but something about the way she said it didn't convince me. The paramedics checked her over and confirmed that her vital signs were stable. They suggested she go to the hospital for more in-depth tests, but Liao insisted on staying. "Rosa Maria," she said when we were alone with the lawyer, "I'm sorry if I scared you. It's just that seeing your face reminded me so much of Eduardo. Sometimes I forget he's gone." Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them. Over the past 3 years, she'd never mentioned that Eduardo and I looked alike. In fact, my son had inherited more of his father's features. Attorney Herrera cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, if you feel ready, we can proceed with the reading of the will, for the next 30 minutes. I heard words I hadn't fully processed. Eduardo had left the family home for me, as he'd hoped, but there were some things that didn't match what I remembered from our conversations. The joint savings account that Mr. Eduardo had with Mrs. Liao, the lawyer continued reading, is completely under the name of Mrs. Liao Morales de Martinez, along with the investments made in the last year." I frowned. Investments in the last year? What investments is he talking about? Liao sat up straight in her chair. "Eduardo hadn't told you about that, Rosa Maria. We decided to invest in some mutual funds. He said it was best not to worry you with those details while you were taking care of him." Something didn't add up. During the last months of Eduardo's life, I had been with him practically every day. He told me everything, his fears, his hopes, his worries about leaving Liao alone. Why wouldn't he have mentioned important investments to me? Could I have a copy of all these documents? I asked the lawyer. "Of course, Mrs. Martinez." I'll have them ready by tomorrow. Liao looked increasingly uncomfortable. Rosa Maria, why do you need to copy everything? The will is very clear. Eduardo wanted me to have financial security. I just want to fully understand what my son decided, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, even though inside I felt something was terribly wrong. When we left the building, Liao walked quickly toward her car, a red Toyota that Eduardo had bought her last year. I have to go. I have a doctor's appointment, she said without meeting my eyes. I watched her walk away and then remembered Carlos. I looked for him and found him sitting on a bench near the parking lot. When I approached, he immediately stood up. How did the meeting go, ma'am? Confused, I admitted. I need you to show me exactly what you saw my daughter-in-law doing. Carlos led me to my car and crouched down near the right front wheel. Here, ma'am. She was working on something nearby. He pointed toward the area where the brakes were. I took out my phone and called Miguel, the mechanic who had been taking care of our cars for the past 15 years. Miguel, I need you to come look at my car. It's an emergency. Miguel arrived in 20 minutes with his truck full of tools. Carlos had stayed with me the whole time, telling me more details of what he had seen. That lady was very nervous, he told me. She kept looking toward the entrance of the building as if she was waiting for someone to come out. When she finished what she was doing, she cleaned her hands very well, as if she didn't want to leave any traces. Miguel got under my car with a flashlight. After a few minutes, he came out with a serious face. Rosa Maria. Someone partially cut the brake cable. Not completely, but enough for them to fail after a few kilometers of driving. It felt like the ground was opening up beneath my feet. Are you sure? Completely sure. This isn't natural wear and tear. Someone did this on purpose. Miguel showed me the damaged cable. If you had driven this car today, especially on a downhill slope or trying to brake suddenly, you would have had a very serious accident. Carlos placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, ma'am. I wish I'd been wrong. My mind was working at 1,000 miles per hour. Leah had arrived early to the meeting. She had sabotaged my car. She had fainted upon seeing me arrive alive and had lied about investments Eduardo had supposedly made without telling me. Miguel, can you fix this today? Sure, but, Rosa Maria, I think you should call the police. This is attempted murder. I shook my head. First, I need to understand what else is going on. There's something bigger going on here. While Miguel worked on my car, I couldn't stop thinking about Liao's expression when she saw me walk into the conference room. It wasn't just surprise, it was pure terror, terror that I was even alive. And if she had lied about the investments, what else had she lied about? What else didn't I know about the last months of my son's life? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen of my house, the same one where I had raised Eduardo, looking at the family photos hanging on the wall. In all of them, my son was smiling with that genuine joy that characterized him. But in the few photos where Leah appeared, after they were married, her smile seemed different, more calculated. At 6 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Carlos. Dressed in the same clothes as the day before, but cleaner, he was carrying a paper bag. Mrs. Rosa Maria, excuse me for coming so early, but I couldn't sleep. I have something to show you. I invited him in and poured him a cup of coffee. His hands were shaking slightly as he took something out of the bag, a stained towel and a small pair of pliers. I took them out of the trash yesterday after you left. I thought they might be important. I examined the towel. It had dark stains that looked like engine grease, but also something reddish that made my blood run cold. The pliers had metallic residue on the tips. Carlos, I need to ask you something very important. How many times have you seen my daughter-in-law around that building? Carlos scratched his chin thoughtfully. In the last 2 months, I've seen her about 5 or 6 times. Always alone, never with her husband, and she always acted strange. Strange, how? Nervous. She looked around a lot, as if she didn't want to be seen. Once I saw her leaving the building crying, but when she saw me looking, she stopped crying immediately, as if it were an act. My stomach tightened. Eduardo never accompanied her? No. Ma'am. In fact, the last few times I saw your son, he looked very sick, thinner, paler. It made me sad to see him like that because he had always been so strong and healthy. Something began to form in my mind. A suspicion so horrible that I didn't even want to think about it. Carlos, do you know if there are doctors' offices in that building? Yes, ma'am. There are several offices on the 4th floor. There's also a small pharmacy on the 1st floor. My hands began to shake. During the last months of Eduardo's life, Leah had always insisted on accompanying him to his doctor's appointments alone. It's very painful for you to see how he suffers, she would tell me. Let me take care of this. And I, like a fool, had agreed because I trusted her. Ma'am, is there anything else? Carlos continued. The last time I saw your daughter-in-law in the building about 3 weeks ago, I followed her because something about her behavior seemed suspicious to me. Did you follow her? Yes. She went to the 4th floor and was there for about an hour. When she came down, she had a small bag from the pharmacy, but the strange thing was that she looked satisfied, as if she'd gotten something she badly needed. 3 weeks ago, Eduardo had worsened drastically. The doctors said it was normal for his condition, but I had felt the deterioration had been too rapid, too severe. Carlos. I need to ask you a huge favor. Could you walk me back to the building? I want to speak to the people on the 4th floor and at the pharmacy. Of course, ma'am, but are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I couldn't answer. The possibility was too monstrous to utter aloud. We arrived at the building at 9 a.m. We started at the pharmacy. The employee, an older woman with glasses, immediately recognized Leah's description. Oh, yes. The woman with the curly black hair. She came often. She always bought very specific medications. What kind of medications? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The pharmacist hesitated. She shouldn't give out that information, but she bought morphine. Liquid morphine, lots of liquid morphine. She said it was for her husband, who was very ill. My world reeled. Eduardo had indeed been taking morphine for pain, but the dosage had been carefully regulated by his oncologist. Why would Leah buy additional morphine without a prescription? Do you remember the last time she came in? About a month ago. She bought bottles. It seemed like a lot to me, but she insisted the doctor had told her to increase the dosage. We went up to the 4th floor. There were 5 doctors' offices. In the 3rd, Dr. Ramirez, a man in his 40s, recognized Leah's description. Yes. She'd been asking about the conditions of different patients. She said she worked for an insurance company and needed medical information. But something about it didn't quite sit right with me. What kind of information was she asking for? She wanted to know about the effects of overdoses of different drugs, specifically morphine and other opiates. She said it was for insurance cases involving accidental death versus death by disease. Carlos and I exchanged glances. The picture was becoming horribly clear. Doctor, is it possible for someone to hasten the death of a terminally ill patient by administering excessive doses of morphine? The doctor looked at me seriously. Of course. A morphine overdose can appear to be a natural death in a patient already taking it for pain. Only a very specific toxicology screen could detect it. And those aren't routinely done when someone dies of cancer. We left the building in complete silence. My mind couldn't fully process what I had just discovered. Leah had not only plotted to kill me to keep the inheritance, she had also killed my son, Mrs. Rosa Maria, Carlos said softly when we reached my car. What are you going to do now? I looked up at the sky, feeling as if my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. My Eduardo, my only son, hadn't died from cancer. He had been murdered by the woman he trusted, by the woman I had treated like a daughter. I'm going to make sure I have proof of all of this, I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, and then Leah is going to pay for what she did. But as I said those words, a terrible question echoed in my mind. Had Eduardo been aware of what was happening to him? Had he known that the woman who claimed to love him was slowly killing him? The next few days were the hardest of my life. I had to act as if nothing had happened while my inner world crumbled. Every time the phone rang and it was Leah calling to ask how I was, I had to control the urge to shout back what I had discovered. But I knew that if I wanted justice for Eduardo, I had to be smart. Carlos had become my unexpected ally. It turned out he had worked in construction his whole life until a back injury left him unable to work. He knew a lot of people in the city, especially other workers who were often invisible to people like Leah. That invisibility, I realized, was our advantage. Mrs. Rosa Maria, he said Thursday morning when he came to see me, I managed to speak with the woman who cleans the building at night. She says she found strange things in the trash on the 4th floor. What kind of things? Empty medication bottles. Always after the days your daughter-in-law visited the building. And something more interesting, she found partially burned papers. She saved them because she thought they might be important. Carlos took several charred pieces of paper out of his backpack. We carefully spread them out on my kitchen table. Some were too damaged to read. But I could make out key words: dosage, side effects, overdose symptoms. One of the fragments had Leah's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. I had seen her notes for years. It said, increase gradually to avoid suspicion, should appear natural, symptoms compatible with disease progression. My stomach churned. There was evidence that Leah had meticulously planned my son's murder. It hadn't been an impulse. It had been a cold, calculated plan. Carlos, I need to get into the house where Eduardo lived with Leah. I need to look for more evidence. How are you going to do that, ma'am? She lives there. Leah has a part-time job in an accounting office. She leaves the house every Tuesday and Thursday from 2 to 6 p.m. Today is Thursday. Carlos looked at me worriedly. What if she discovers you? Eduardo gave me an emergency key years ago. I never asked for it back. At 2:30 p.m., Carlos and I were standing in front of the house that Eduardo had bought with so much effort 3 years before. It was a modest but pretty house, with a small garden that he had planted himself. Seeing the flowers that Eduardo had tended, now wilting under Leah's care, broke my heart. We entered silently. The house smelled different. It no longer had that cinnamon and coffee scent that Eduardo always maintained. Now it smelled of cleaning chemicals and something else I couldn't identify. Let's check his room, I whispered. The master bedroom had changed completely. Eduardo had kept pictures of us on his nightstand, but they were gone now. In their place, Leah had put pictures of herself alone, as if Eduardo had never existed. In the closet, among Leah's clothes, we found a small box hidden behind the shoes. Inside were things that made my blood run cold: more empty morphine bottles, used syringes, and, most disturbing of all, a notebook where Leah had meticulously documented Eduardo's deterioration. Day 15. I increased the dosage. Eduardo is more confused. Excellent. Day 23. The doctors don't suspect a thing. E is too weak to protest the medications. Day 30. Rosa Maria asked why E was sleeping so much. I told her it was the effects of the treatment. Day 40. Eduardo tried to call Rosa Maria to tell her something about the medications, but I stopped him. I told her he was delirious from the fever. I need to speed up the process. Day 45. E is getting suspicious. Last night he tried to hide the pills under his tongue. I had to switch to injections while he slept. My son had known in his final days, I whispered. Eduardo had known something was wrong, but he was too weak and confused from the medications to do anything about it. Ma'am, look at this, Carlos said from the bathroom. He had found an unopened bottle of liquid morphine hidden behind the cleaning products, but the most shocking discovery was in the bottom drawer of Eduardo's desk. There was a letter in his shaky handwriting of the last few days addressed to me. Mom, if you're reading this, it's because something happened to me. Leah is doing something to my medications. I feel worse every time she gives them to me. I tried to tell you when you came yesterday, but she's always around. I'm scared, Mom. I don't think I'm going to make it through this, but not the way the doctors say. I love you, take care of yourself, Eduardo. The letter was dated 5 days before his death. 5 days in which my son had been conscious that he was being poisoned, but too weak to do anything about it. I cried silently as Carlos comforted me. My poor Eduardo had died knowing the truth, feeling betrayed by the woman he had loved and married. We need to leave before she comes back, Carlos told me gently. I photographed every page of the notebook, Eduardo's letter, and the medication bottles with my phone. I also took the original letter with me, knowing it was crucial evidence. By the time we left the house, my sadness had transformed into something more powerful, determination. Leah had killed my son in the cruelest way possible, letting him know in his final days that he was being poisoned. But powerless to do anything to stop it. Now I had to decide my next step. I had enough evidence to go to the police, but something told me Leah wouldn't give up easily. If she found out I knew the truth, she might run away, or worse, try to silence me permanently. Carlos, I told him as we drove back to my house, I think Leah is going to try something else. Now that she failed to kill me with the car sabotage, she is going to find another way. What do you propose we do, ma'am? We're going to spring a trap. We're going to get her to confess everything she did. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to get Leah to confess. Carlos had gotten a small tape recorder from a friend of his who worked in security. I hid it in my bag and practiced acting like I knew nothing for hours in front of my bedroom mirror. I texted Leah Friday morning, I need to talk to you about something important. We can meet at the cafe where you used to go with Eduardo. It's about the inheritance. Her reply came almost immediately, of course, Rosa Maria. What time? 3 p.m. I chose that cafe specifically because I knew it had emotional significance for her. It was where Eduardo had proposed to her 3 years earlier. I thought being there might make her let her guard down. Carlos would be sitting at a nearby table pretending to read a newspaper. We had agreed on a signal in case things got out of hand. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in a corner. Away from other clients, but where Carlos could see me clearly. My hands sweated while I waited, mentally reviewing everything I had to say to get Leah to confess without suspecting that I already knew the truth. Leah arrived exactly at 3. She looked different from how I'd seen her at the funeral and at the lawyer's office. More relaxed, almost happy. She was wearing a new dress, and her hair was freshly done. She didn't look like a grieving widow. Rosa Maria, you look tired, she said, sitting down across from me. Have you been sleeping well? It's been hard to sleep since Eduardo left, I replied, watching her reaction carefully. For a moment, something changed in her expression. A micro-smile that she immediately tried to hide. I understand perfectly. I miss Eduardo a lot, too. Liar, I thought, but I kept my face neutral. Leah, I wanted to talk to you because I had some doubts after the meeting with the lawyer. Her body tensed slightly. What kind of doubts? About those investments that you mentioned. Eduardo never told me about them, and I knew all his financial plans. Leah leaned back in her chair, calculating her response. Rosa Maria, I don't want to sound harsh, but Eduardo didn't tell you everything, especially towards the end, when he was very sick. Sometimes cancer patients become confused. Confused? Yes. Pain medication affects the mind. Eduardo sometimes couldn't remember conversations we'd had the day before. That lie hurt me deeply, but I had to keep acting. I suppose you're right. It's just that I'm surprised he invested so much money without telling me. They were smart decisions, Leah said more confidently. Eduardo wanted to secure my future. He knew I don't have the work experience you have. Sure. And I suppose the doctor said his deterioration at the end was normal, right? Leah's eyes lit up with something that looked like perverse pride. Well, Eduardo was very lucky not to suffer too much. The pain medication really helped make it peaceful. Did you administer the medication? Yes, of course. The doctor said it was important to keep a strict schedule. Eduardo sometimes forgot, especially toward the end. Lie again. Eduardo never forgot to take his medication. He was meticulous about it. It must have been difficult for you to see him deteriorate so quickly, I said, observing her reaction. Leah looked down, but not before I saw a flash of satisfaction in her eyes. It was very hard, but at least he didn't suffer for long. How long would you say the hardest stage lasted? Maybe the last 6 weeks. That was when he really got worse fast. Exactly the time that coincided with her visits to the office building to get extra morphine. Leah, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. But I could see tension in her shoulders. Did you ever feel that maybe Eduardo would have lived longer if he'd received a different treatment? Her answer made my blood run cold. Rosa Maria, Eduardo was suffering a lot. Sometimes when you truly love someone, the best way to help them is to ensure that they don't suffer unnecessarily. What do you mean by that exactly? Leah looked me straight in the eyes and, for the first time, I saw her true nature unmasked. I mean, sometimes you have to make difficult decisions other people might not understand. My heart raced. She was about to confess. What kind of decisions, Leah? Well, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. If someone is suffering and is going to die anyway, wouldn't it be more compassionate to help them speed up the process so they don't suffer anymore? Are you saying that Eduardo was lucky to have someone who loved him so much that they made sure his last days weren't a prolonged agony? There was the confession I needed. Leah, you increased Eduardo's morphine doses. She smiled. A cold, calculated smile. Rosa Maria, you are very innocent. Eduardo was suffering. I eased his suffering a little faster than it would have happened naturally. You killed him? I freed him, she said without showing a hint of remorse. And now I have the resources to live the life I always wanted. In the end, Eduardo served a useful purpose. The mask had fallen completely. Leah had not only killed my son, she had also been pretending to be a grieving widow while rejoicing in her freedom and new wealth. And what about the sabotage to my car? Leah straightened abruptly. What do you know about that? I know that you cut the cables of my brakes the day of the meeting with the lawyer. Her expression changed to pure coldness. Well, Rosa Maria, if you already know that, then you know I can't allow you to walk around sharing stories. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you the reality. Eduardo is no longer here to protect you, and accidents can happen to anyone, especially to older women who live alone. That direct threat was the last thing I needed to hear. I had everything recorded, but now I was afraid Leah would try to hurt me right there in the cafe. I looked toward where Carlos was. He had noticed the tension and had moved a little closer to our table. Leah, I said, keeping calm, I think this conversation has ended. Oh, no, Rosa Maria. I think it's just beginning. What happened next in the cafe unfolded like a movie in slow motion. Leah had leaned forward, her eyes shining with a malice I had never seen before in a real person. Her next words confirmed my worst fears. Rosa Maria, you were a good mother-in-law, but you were always an obstacle. Eduardo adored you too much. Every time I suggested moving far away, he said he couldn't leave you alone. Every time I wanted to do something with his money, he consulted you first. Her voice had turned venomous, full of resentment accumulated over years. At first I thought I could wait. After all, you're 62. But then I realized you could live another 20 years interfering in my life, asking me questions about Eduardo's money. So you decided to kill me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The sabotage of your car would have been perfect, an accident. No one would have suspected anything. But that damn vagrant. Her face twisted in frustration. And Eduardo, why did you kill him too? Leah laughed. A laugh that chilled my bones. Two. Rosa Maria, Eduardo was the main plan. You were just cleanup. Did you really think I married your son for love? Eduardo was sweet, yes, but also naive, and he had money. The life insurance he had through work was worth $500,000, plus the house, plus the savings accounts. It was an investment for the future. But the cancer was a gift from heaven, she said coldly. It gave me the perfect cover. Everyone expects a cancer patient to die. I just had to accelerate the process a little. My hands trembled as I processed the magnitude of her evil. How long had you been planning this? Since before I married him. I knew about his genetic predisposition to cancer. Your family has a history, right? His father died young of cancer too. It was true. Eduardo's father had died of cancer when Eduardo was just 15. I waited patiently, and when he was finally diagnosed, I knew it was my chance. You're a monster. I'm a survivor, she replied without flinching, unlike your son, who was too noble for his own good. Do you know what he told me in his last conscious days? I didn't want to hear it, but she continued anyway. He told me he loved me and hoped I would be happy after he was gone. Even while he was dying because of me, he was worried about my happiness. Tears began to run down my cheeks. The image of my Eduardo, noble and kind to the end, dying while worrying about the woman who was killing him. But now you know everything, Leah continued. And that's a problem. She leaned even closer, and I could see she had something in her hand under the table. What do you have there, Leah? Just a little insurance, in case you decide to be problematic. At that moment, Carlos approached our table. Excuse me, ladies. Is everything okay here? Leah started, quickly hiding what she had in her hand. Everything is perfect. Thank you, Rosa Maria, Carlos said, looking directly at me. Are you ready to go? I understood the signal. Yes, I think this conversation has ended. I stood up slowly, but Leah grabbed my arm. We haven't finished talking, Rosa Maria. Yes, we have, I said firmly. Then Carlos did something unexpected. He stepped closer and said, loud enough to carry, ma'am, I think you should know that everything you've talked about has been recorded and streamed live to the police station. Leah paled. What? Carlos smiled. My friend in security didn't just lend me a recorder, he also taught me to use an app that streams live. The detectives have been listening to the entire conversation, as if it had been orchestrated. 3 police officers entered the cafe at that moment. Leah Morales de Martinez, one of them asked. Leah stood up abruptly and what she had hidden fell to the floor. It was a small syringe. You are under arrest on suspicion of homicide and attempted homicide. While they handcuffed her, Leah looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Rosa Maria. Yes, Leah, this has ended. The following days were a whirlwind of police statements, interviews with detectives, and the painful but necessary exhumation of Eduardo's body for a complete toxicology exam. The results confirmed what I already knew. Eduardo had died from a massive morphine overdose administered approximately 6 hours before his official time of death. They also found traces of other sedatives that Leah had used to keep him unconscious during his final hours. The letter Eduardo had written, along with Leah's notebook documenting the murder and the recording of her confession in the cafe, constituted irrefutable evidence. Leah was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 3 months after the trial, I was sitting in my garden. The same garden where Eduardo had played when he was a child. Carlos had come to visit me, as he had every week since everything ended. How do you feel, Mrs. Rosa Maria? He asked. Sad, I admitted. But also relieved. Eduardo can rest in peace now. And you can rest in peace as well. I looked toward the flowers Eduardo had planted, now blooming under my care again. I think so. For the first time in months, I think I can. Carlos had become more than an ally. He had become a true friend, someone who had risked his own safety to help me obtain justice for my son. Carlos, there's something I've been thinking about. What is it, ma'am? The inheritance money, Eduardo's life insurance. All of that is legally mine now. He nodded, not knowing where I was going. I want to use it for something good, something that would have made Eduardo happy. Like what? There are many people like you who have had bad luck but are good people. I want to create a small fund to help people who need a second chance. Carlos's eyes filled with tears. Eduardo would be proud of you. I hope so. That night, alone in my house, I took out the last letter that Eduardo had written to me. I had read it hundreds of times, but that night I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the last line, after take care of yourself, there was something else written very lightly in pencil, but don't let hatred consume your heart. You've always been stronger than any cruelty. My Eduardo, even in his darkest moments, had worried about my emotional well-being. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my memory box. Leah had paid for her crimes. Eduardo had been avenged. And I, at 62, had learned that it is never too late to be strong, to fight for justice, and to find new purpose in life. Justice had arrived quietly, but it had arrived. And for the first time since my son's death, I was able to sleep in peace.